The purpose of this video is to show you how to properly complete a gridded graphite pencil portrait drawing. As you can see, I have begun to divide my reference photo into columns and squares. My drawing sheet has already been divided into the same amount of squares and columns as my reference photo. When you are working with a gridded drawing, you must make sure that the grid on your drawing sheet matches the grid on the reference photo. In this drawing, I believe I have enlarged my grid 2 times, so I believe that the reference photo is 1-inch squares and my drawing sheet is 2-inch squares. What I would like you to notice first is where I began to draw on my grid. I am right-handed, so I began in the top left corner of my grid. Being right-handed, I want to work away from my graphite, that way I'm not smearing it or dirtying my drawing. If I was left-handed, I would start in the top right and work my way from right to left. But since I'm right-handed, I'm working from left to right, that way I'm not smearing into my artwork. The second thing I would like you to notice is how I'm working my way from left to right. I am strictly working in the first column. Many of my students tend to look at the reference photo and start to just sketch the outline of the face, of the eyes, all the facial features. It's a way of kind of cutting through or taking a shortcut. People feel like, oh, well, I'll just outline everything out. It's faster. It'll look right. That defeats the purpose of the grid. If you were going to do it in that manner, you might as well have not even used the grid. So I have you use this technique, the grid technique, so that you are constantly checking and looking at value. So what I tell people is treat each little square as a mini drawing. You want to get as close to the values as you see in each drawing. So when you're working, say, in square B2, look in your reference photo. Anywhere it gets lighter or darker, you try to replicate that as close as possible. Notice the tools I'm using right now to create this portrait. It's a lead pencil or mechanical pencil with HB lead and a retractable eraser. I use the mechanical pencil to create the lights and darks values that I'm trying to replicate from the reference photo. I do that by pressing down harder to create the dark values, and I lessen that pressure to create the lighter values. Now, if there is an area that I overblended by making it too dark, I go back with my eraser and I start to lightly remove some of that graphite to create the lighter values, or completely erasing it to create a very bright highlight. Anything that is super shiny or reflective on the portrait needs to be left the white of the paper. Looking at my reference photo, my reference is Mos Def, who is an African American rapper. Obviously his skin is dark, but any highlight will still be left the white of the paper. That's going to give you the illusion of a shininess or a real glossy surface. Okay, now in my third column, I reached what's, in my opinion, the hardest part of the portrait, is the shape of the eyes. I tend to make the eyes a lot bigger on my first try. Even if I sit there and tell myself, don't make the eyes too big, don't make the eyes too big, I still tend to make them too big. And you'll notice in a few minutes that that eye that I'm creating right now is way too big for my portrait. As much as I try to focus and try to make it the correct size, somehow I still do it. I have to correct it. For me, it works to draw something incorrectly and then correct it. I'm still trying to break that bad habit. But if you sit down and truly look at what is going on in that square, if I looked at what was going on in square D, column 3, I needed to make it a lot smaller. I made it way too wide for that square. But I was rushing through it. At this point, I believe it was like 2 in the morning, and I just was trying to get it done to finish this portrait for the next morning. But I ended up not finishing it anyways. But you need to slow down and focus. This is a prime example of trying to rush something. I have no clue right now that that eye is too big. It's not until I start creating the right eye that I start noticing that one eye is high, one eye is low. And sometimes that's what it takes. You need your second eye to kind of compare where they line up at. And now you're starting to notice that one's a little too low compared to the other, and that's where I start catching it, but I need to correct that. Also, another thing I need to mention is that when I am creating the hair for his eyebrows, it's a short hatch. For me, it's easier to create a hatch mark to give the illusion of hair instead of trying to like slowly blend it. If you make it too smooth, it's not going to give you that texture, that visual texture. I like to hatch it in like a good vertical diagonal hatch, all depending on which way the hair is growing. Most Steph's eyebrows are a little bushy, so I was looking very close at his photograph and I was trying to hatch in the direction that his eyebrows are growing in. So now that it's zoomed in a little bit here, you can see that hatch. So anything that it's hair, like hair on your head, eyebrows, facial hair, eyelashes, you're going to want to do that in a hatch technique. And if you forgot what that is, that's close lines that are spaced together. If they're closer, they're darker. If they're spaced out, they're lighter. There's a video on my channel that shows you how to hatch in more detail, but you want to hatch to create facial hair or any type of hair that's on the portrait. Just gives you a good visual texture. Also, I don't know if you noticed that I use a piece of a flyer to help me gauge where the eyelids were at. I used it to kind of figure out that one was a little too high compared to the other. So right now, if you're looking at it, the right eyelid is lower than the left eyelid. And I still haven't figured that out because I'm just drawing. I'm in that zone where I'm not really paying attention to things that I already drew because I think they're done. Later on in the video, you'll see I'll correct the eyes probably about 3 more times. I have a hard problem fixing eyes. I get close to it, but I tend to exaggerate them. I make them more cartoon-like, I guess. They're just a little too big. I tend to go too large, and later on I end up staring at it. I look at it and I correct things. And that's what I tell a lot of my students. It's easier to make something and then correct it. If you just sit there and keep erasing and never draw anything, you're gonna get stuck or stumped in that one section forever. So I tend to just kind of move on. Right now that I actually put in the shadows for the nose, the eyes look a little more normal, but they are slightly off. So now that I have more information to help me get proper proportions, I can start seeing the errors of my drawing. I can figure out, okay, well, the eye is too low here, the nose is helping me gauge that, because however wide the nose is, it can tell me where those eyes would land. So right now I can tell the left eye is a little too high, and you'll see in a few minutes I'll end up fixing that. And notice how I just created that ear out of nothing. I just took that eraser and I drew in that negative space. Use the eraser like a pencil. It is a drawing tool. It's not just to, fix mistakes. It's there to create lines. That is a negative or an implied line. So use your eraser to help you take out some of those highlights. In my reference photo, his ears are hit by light because he's sitting in a shadow. So I just kind of erased out the shape of that ear and I shaded in a little bit where those shadows would be. So just kind of use that to your benefit. A lot of people don't think of an eraser as a drawing tool. They just think, I need this to correct my my mistakes. Yeah, it is used for that, but you could do so much more with an eraser. I'm sure you noticed that I've switched pencils. It's still an HB grade pencil. It's just a blue Blick drawing pencil. This drawing sat on my desk for maybe a couple months before I got back to it. So the mechanical pencil that I was using just disappeared. I don't know where it's at, so I just chose to use a drawing pencil. But it's the same grade. Nothing's fancy about it. It's just same thing. It's just a wood pencil instead of a mechanical pencil. But notice that I have not jumped around. I'm still working column by column, working from left to right. I'm not smudging my drawing. I'm not placing my hand on top of my drawing. You want to keep things neat. It's a portrait. You want things to look nice and clean. So just be more aware of where you're placing your hand. And keep focus on trying to get each individual square done correctly before you move on. If you look at the video now, you'll notice that my mouth is slightly to the left compared to my eyes and my nose. And that's because I started losing focus. I started paying attention more to things around it. I started jumping around above me, things that I felt like I missed. And then I just came back and tried to draw them out in really fast. I kind of lost focus there and things moved. But I stopped. I always look at my drawing from far away and I noticed, oh, hey, the mouth is off. So I started fixing that a little later, and you'll see that in the video. The best way to notice things in a photograph, or sorry, in a portrait, is to take a photograph of it, and the photograph will show you that the eyes are maybe off or something's misaligned. Or as easy as just putting it against the wall and then standing a good 10 feet from it, you'll start seeing those misalignments. So always take breaks, pause, look at it, figure out what needs to be tweaked, and then fix it. If you just keep drawing with never like stopping and looking at it, then you're gonna have a lot of mistakes like I did. I just get to the point where I want to finish my example. I feel like, okay, it looks good, I'm gonna just keep going, and I make small mistakes and I have to do a lot of corrections, which there's nothing wrong with that, but if you can avoid doing that, it'll make your life a lot easier. And I forgot to mention, when I was creating the grooves in the lip, I used a hatching method. And if you remember that from my hatching mouth video, the one that's posted prior to this one, it's the video of those lips that you saw above my portrait. Use a lot of hatching to create those grooves, those shadows, to kind of create that indentation in the lips. So think about hatching that. If you don't hatch it, it's going to just look really soft and flat. So you want to kind of create some grooves by hatching. And notice I just used what's called a tortillon or a smudge pencil. All it is compressed paper with a pointy end to it. What you use that for is to create blends. So I used that on his forehead and slightly on the nose to create a softer a blend. I typically don't use tortillons. I try not to use them, but I notice a lot of my students like using them. They like that effect. So I was kind of playing around with it in this portrait, and I actually liked it. I ended up loving it. So there's some benefits of using that. So I'm using it there. It just softens up your lid. It gives you this more like softer, powdery looking blend than just a scratchy, hand pressure blend like I typically do with my pencils. So the tortillon, I try to only use it on the skin, so the skin looked softer, but I left the background and the facial hair and inside the eyes, I left that still, the hand pressure, that scratchiness, because you're still going to want some visual texture. You don't want everything to look nice and soft. And I've noticed that when a lot of my students are creating portraits, they want to blend everything out with tortillons or with their hand. That's not a good look, because then you start making everything this middle gray and it looks really, really dull. So you want to vary your values. So you also notice now that I am using what's called an ebony pencil. The ebony pencil is a darker grade of pencil. I think it's somewhere in the realm of like a 4B or a 6B. Prisma doesn't have a rating on it. It's just called an ebony pencil. But it's made by Prisma, and it's a pretty dark valued pencil. So I'm using that to kind of bring out areas that I believe need to be darker, like the background, the eyebrows, the eyes, any dark shadows on his face, like inside the lips. So this is where you start seeing things kind of pop out more. It looks more three-dimensional because you have a good drastic change in value. And this is where I go into more of a cleanup phase. Since I finished drawing all the columns, I go back column by column and start trying to correct things. This is why I'm using the ebony to make things darker, because there's a lot of values I couldn't get with an HB pencil. I could press down as hard as I like, but it wasn't going to get as dark as ebony would. So I switched back to ebony to create those drastic dark values. It's going to make for a better portrait. Also, you notice I corrected my eyelids. They were slightly misshapen. I'm going back and I'm fixing shadows that need to be emphasized in the lips and the eyebrows. I'm trying to get that glossiness of the eye correct, so I keep erasing and fixing that so it looks like he's looking straight and that both eyes are about the same size. Notice I'm still using the tortillon to blend areas out. Also, there's something that I haven't mentioned earlier in the video, is that I try to keep my hand underneath my reference photo or any kind of scrap paper so that I'm not putting oils on top of my drawing and blending things out, because now that I'm cleaning things up, I have to put my hands on top of it. Now what you just saw there, that's workable fixative. I sprayed that because I felt that what I had so far was good and I didn't want to erase any of that or ruin anything. So the workable fixative, what it does, it creates a layer over your drawing so that you can no longer remove it as easy. Even if I tried erasing as hard as I could, it probably wouldn't erase much of it. So So I'm sealing it so now I could put a second layer of value on top of it. Now the pencil you see me working with now, it's an 8B. It's a Faber-Castell aqua graphite pencil. It tends to be a lot darker than an ebony pencil, so I wanted to use that for my background, because in the photograph the background is insanely dark because he's sitting in the shadow, and I didn't feel like the ebony got dark enough to create that illusion, so I grabbed that 8B and used that, and now you can see that his face is kind of standing out a lot more. It looks like it's in the dark. Now this Faber-Castell pencil, because it reacts to water, I took what's called a chamois with a very, very minimal amount of water, and I pressed into it to blend it. So now it looks nice and clean, and it doesn't look grainy. That was the reason why I chose that pencil, because I knew that I didn't want it to look scratchy or grainy in the background. So the 8B Faber-Castell aqua pencil, it's really cool. This is the first time I've used it. I was very pleased with it. I think it's a really good pencil to use for portraits. So now I'm using this 8P to emphasize any dark shadows that I feel I missed. So eyebrows, eyes, just to give it that extra touch that it needs to stand out more. Just that extra darkness in the eyes and in eyebrows made the portrait, that much better. And that's why I say when you're drawing portraits, just slow down, be patient, pay attention to what you're drawing.